Hello everyone, I'm Lynette from Team 3, and together with my group members, Stephanie and Wei Wei, we embarked on a trail to Chinatown where we visited Tongchai Medical Institution to understand more about the cultural heritage of traditional Chinese medicine, or more commonly known as TCM, in Singapore. Here's an outline of what we'll be covering in this presentation. I'll be starting off the hypothesis and thesis. Following that, we'll be looking at a definition of rich cultural practices, hybridization, and economic function, after which I'll be touching on the history of TCM in Singapore. Stephanie and Wei Wei will then be presenting on the arguments, which include the goal of TCMI, architecture and funding of TCMI, forms of TCM hybridization, and government's emphasis on TCM. Finally, Wei Wei will be wrapping up our presentation with a conclusion. Alright, let's begin. The hypothesis is that modernization in Singapore reduces rich cultural practices to their economic value and function. After conducting background research on TCM in Singapore and embarking on our trail to Tongchai Medical Institution, we disagree with this hypothesis because these rich cultural practices are hybridized. They have taken on modern forms and practices constructed from traditional elements. Although modernization has placed more emphasis on the economic function of these cultural practices, it is not intuitively reduced to its economic value and function, as efforts have been made to conserve them, and these practices are still fulfilling their fundamental roles in today's society. And now, let's look at the definition of rich cultural practices, hybridization, and economic function. Rich cultural practices refers to the manifestation of a culture with regards to traditional practices developed within specific ethnic groups, especially those aspects of culture that have been practiced since ancient times. Hybridization refers to TCM absorbing modern forms and practices which are constructed from traditional elements. And for economic function, it refers to the economic development of Singapore, which is in connection with the technological and social progress. And it also refers to the increased assets or profits for the organization itself. In this presentation, we'll be focusing on traditional Chinese medicine, or more commonly known as TCM. In particular, most of our arguments will be based on our findings from Tongchai Medical Institution. Here's a brief history of TCM in Singapore. Tongchai Medical Institution was actually the first TCM facility set up in Singapore. It was established as a free clinic in 1867 with the fundamental aim of providing free medical consultation and herbal medicine to Singaporeans. The name Tongchai was derived from the Chinese word Tong, which means the same or equal treatment for all, Ji, meaning to help or relieve the people, thus a charitable organization specializing in TCM. Other than bringing TCM to the poor, Tongchai made significant contribution to early Singapore as it improved the health of early Chinese immigrants who looked hurt and often needed medical treatment. It served not only as a medical institution, but also gained much respect from the Chinese community as it was a common place that brought the Chinese people together. It was the foundation for Chinese education and a place where the Chinese can engage in business activities. Eventually, a library and a herbs display center were established in the late 1970s, thereby bringing the standards of TCM in Singapore to higher levels. With this, I'll pass on the time to Stephanie to share with you more about our arguments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. I'm Stephanie, and I shall now proceed with our arguments, which can be classified into four main points: the goal of TCM institutions, architecture of Tongchai Medical Institution cum funding of Tongchai Medical Institution, forms of hybridization, as well as government's emphasis on TCM. While our argument aims to cover the TCM industry in Singapore, the limitation is that most of our examples are centered mainly around Tongchai Medical Institution, since it is the site which we have visited on our heritage trail. I will be covering the first half of the argument, while Wei Wei will carry on with the later half. To reiterate our stand, we disagree that these rich cultural practices with regards to TCM practices are reduced to its economic function. That is, Its existence is not to merely make profits or contribute towards the economic development of Singapore, because there is hybridization. We now take a look at the first main point of our argument. In the past, TCM clinics mainly operate with the goal of providing free, affordable treatment for the general public. Increasingly, more TCM clinics such as Yuyuan Sang and Beijing 101 are utilizing strong advertising campaigns and business strategies. TCM clinics today are increasingly run as business ventures, with TCM practitioners charging high prices and incorporating marketing plans, expanding and franchising their businesses, etc. With more TCM clinics taking on modern elements like franchising, it may seem that these clinics today only exist to serve the economic purpose, which is to earn profits. However, free clinics like Tong Chai Medical Institution, Chung Hua Medical Institution, and other free clinics still exist and continue to serve its traditional role of improving the health of the population. Also, as mentioned by Lynette earlier, although these TCM clinics are not so much about a common place meant for the Chinese as it was in the past, seen in the case of Tong Chai Medical Institution, free TCM clinics located in temples do still bring the Chinese people of the same beliefs together. Thus, we can see that TCM practices are hybridized. They are still conserved and still fulfill its fundamental role, albeit with more modern elements incorporated. Let us move on to our next point. The architecture of former Tong Chai building at Wayang Street emphasized strongly on Chinese traditional cultural elements. However, the present 10-story building at Chin Swee Road has more modern features with less traditional Chinese architecture elements. In fact, the upper levels of the building are rented out to raise funds to sustain their clinic. Now, this raises the question of whether its existence is mainly for economic value.